Everyone to this meeting of the Economy and Housing Policy Committee from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Batho, Chairperson of the committee. Some housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is recorded and broadcast live on the Council's YouTube site and may also be recorded by the press and members of the public. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all instructions given to you by our team. So turning to the agenda. Agenda item 1, apologies and deputy members. I don't believe there's any apologies from members of the committee. Matthew?
Good evening, Chair members. No apologies, Chair. I've just noted that Councillor Eve isn't present at the moment. And apologies from Councillor Reach and Councillor Becker, who hope to attend as well, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I understand Councillor Eve is on his way, but just slightly delayed. Then item 2, do we have any declarations of interest from members of the committee? Thank you. There's no announcements from myself. And then item 4. Now looking at the previous minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of July 2025 on pages 5 to 10 of the pack. Can we please confirm that the agreement that the minutes of the meeting on that date are a correct record? Are there any items from the minutes people would like to raise before we do that? No? So do we agree that that's a complete record? Okay, agreed. Thank you. Okay, item number 5, public participation. We now have one registered speaker, Mr. Tate, to speak on housing development strategy and preventing homelessness and rough sleeping. And I take it you'd like to speak before each of those items. Thank you very much. I think, Lynn, you'd registered to speak, but now you'd decided that answers have already been provided in the information that's in the pack. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so if we'd like to move now to item 6, which is the first of our items on the agenda, which is actually a very full agenda with quite a few items of quite some length. So we'll try to actually go through these as quickly as possible, obviously giving them due questioning as we go through. So the first item, item 6, is the Winchester District Tourism Strategy 2026 to 2030, a baseline report and outline recommendations. These can be found on pages 11 to 28 in your packs. And I'll ask Councillor Thompson to come and introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, members, for giving the local economy and tourism team the opportunity to present the latest findings in preparation of producing a tourism strategy. I hope you've all had a chance to and had the time to take a look at the slides that we sent in the agenda pack. I'm going to give you an introduction to the information contained in them, and then we look forward to answering any questions you may have. And I'm delighted to welcome to the table to join us in our discussion our consultant from Blue Sail. There we are, Adam Bates, thank you. And Andrew Costello and Rachel Gander from the tourism team. As I'm sure you will recognise, the visitor economy is hugely important to our district. 8 million visits annually, supporting approximately 5,760 jobs, which generates £292 million for the local economy. So it is a huge chunk of keeping our high streets and our visitor attractions going. And we have a great deal to offer those visitors. Heritage, a rich history, market towns with their very own characteristics, the South Downs National Park, our countryside. And of course, we all know that Winchester is the sparkling wine capital of Hampshire because we have so many vineyards within our district. So there are many reasons why we attract so many visitors, but how can we build on this? As I mentioned, Blue Sail have carried out a lot of consultation, and we were very pleased with the numbers of individuals and businesses that took part and gave us their views. And this evidence will obviously form the base of our strategy. So what did we learn? Well, if you go to the slide on page 16, you will see that for most visitors, they are day trippers. And probably because of this, the spend per visitor is lower when compared to those of our neighbours. On the positive side, Winchester City is easy to reach, but getting out to the rural district, as we all know, is far more challenging. Our visitors fall into 4 categories: history and heritage, our food and drink offer, nature and outdoors, and of course our visitor attractions. We found that there is potential to create a stronger narrative around our heritage and culture, and there was a lack of knowledge about the many vineyards that are located within our district. And of course, our setting, our landscape, something we probably all take a bit for granted, has, compared to our heritage, quite a low profile. And of course, we could do so much more to reinforce our vibrant festival scene, which is growing year on year. On pages 18 and 19, you'll see what our businesses and visitors told us. Businesses want to see more collaboration on marketing, a look to encourage younger visitors and help with wayfinding around the district, while our visitor motivation is mainly around our heritage offer. But clearly this shows that we are missing out on a number of sectors: family short breaks and younger visitors who possibly view us as slightly old-fashioned. And there's nothing wrong in that, but we do have a younger side to us too, and a vibrant side. So there is much we can do to improve our marketing of both the city and our district, and the slides on the following pages from page 22 to 25 set out our thoughts on how we can improve going forward. Our conclusions are set out on page 26 with 4 areas to focus on, followed by the next steps. A lot of work has been undertaken to get to this point, and we would welcome the committee's views on the conclusions reached so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. So with the officers going to follow up on that.
Happy to take questions, and I know that I don't know whether either Mr. Costello or Ms. Gander have any further comments.
I'd just like to echo Councillor Thompson's comments there. Just also to highlight that the consultation also enabled us to understand what the industry wanting from us as a council as well, which I think is probably worth highlighting and bringing the policy committee's attention to. And that was very much about continuing our role in terms of destination management and leading with the Visit Wiltshire brand, Visit Winchester brand, but also being a convener and a supporter and ambassador of the local industry. So being that convening organisation that is bringing various different stakeholders together for the betterment of the visitor economy as a whole. But other than that, I think obviously Councillor Thompson covered the whole of the paper very well. In terms of the next steps after today, we would look to be doing some further consultation with an advisory group of key stakeholders across the visitor economy as the priorities become clearer as part of the development of the strategy. strategy, then taking that a little bit wider in terms of consultation across the industry as a whole, echoing all the work that we did with Blue Sail, our consultants, in terms of consulting the industry earlier this year, with then the plan to eventually take that through policy committee again, potentially, but also cabinet for endorsement towards the end of this financial year. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, first question for myself then. In terms of the visitors, you've identified that 97.3 are single day visitors. Do you have any more granularity in terms of that, in terms of the profile? We obviously have quite a few coach visitors who come by coach. There's sort of then various locations that they might be coming from. Do you have more of granularity in where that 97.3% actually comes from? Thank you.
Yes, certainly, Councillor Batho, and also I'll bring in Adam as well, that obviously led on the evidence base as well. But yes, we have a significant number of day visitors to the destination. There is a considerable number of those that are sort of local, within sort of an hour to 2 hours drive time. We get quite a lot of London visitors because of obviously our very strong transport routes in and out of London, which is of a significant market for us. And in terms of the visitor profile, part of the work that we did as part of this piece of developing this strategy was around gaining some further intel around our visitors and the demographic and locations, but also the age profile. And not surprisingly, a lot of that age profile is slightly towards the older end, but certainly showing opportunity with our product and opportunity to develop our product to actually shift that profile to a slightly younger demographic as well. But all of that intelligence is very much feeding into the emerging priorities going forward. But I'll refer to Adam for some further information that he might have.
The national day visit data, which was referenced in the report, has limited granularity. So as part of the piece of work, we also work with a research partner to go out and do direct interviews with visitors, non-visitors, and recent visitors. And there were over 1,000 interviews conducted as part of that. So that, again, is embedded within here, and there's a separate report that goes into even greater detail, but it does allow for some of that granularity, which, as you said, gives us a clear indication of kind of where they're from, what they understand about the destination, their awareness of it, their motivations for visiting, who they're visiting with, their kind of profile, if you like, demographically. So there's quite a lot, which again in the chapter headings within the baseline we've attempted to summarize, really to give you the kind of, I suppose, the rounded insights that are really going to inform the next steps.
Councillor White.
So regarding the consultation, I wondered what consultation was done with rural businesses and what their specific needs are, which would be quite different from city centre businesses. And living in the Meon Valley, I mean, we see people cycling, horse riding, walking. I think there's quite a market there for active outdoor enthusiasts. So I wonder if that came out in any of the consultation that you did.
Yes, certainly, as we sort of, thank you very much, Councillor White, highlighted earlier, that with the evidence base is actually supported by an extremely strong and robust level of consultation and intelligence from our businesses. And as Adam has said, over sort of 1,000 respondents, and those respondents were through one-to-one meetings and interviews across the whole district with businesses that we had recommended that had came forward. So a number of those were rurally located, as well as a series of business surveys that were undertaken, and then that then led into 2 workshops that was directly with the industry to debate and discuss emerging priorities and themes. And again, that industry was district-wide and had a number of different smaller rural businesses, as well as city centre businesses. And of course, we could then enable to then hear their voices to make sure that those elements are very specific to the rural visitor economy are well heard. And then we'll will be well considered in terms of the developing priorities, and then out of that the annual action plans that we'll produce. But again, as Adam from Blue Cellar Consultant led those consultations, I don't know, Adam, if there's anything you want to add, particularly with rural economy.
Yes, they were absolutely part of the engagement. I think we had over 60 at the workshops and over 65, responded to the survey, and around 20 were sort of interviewed directly as part of one-to-ones. Probably unsurprisingly, I mean, I think that there's some, I suppose, some themes and some challenges that are common, across the district. There are some things that are much more specific to those who are in rural areas, but it probably again depends slightly differently upon the nature of the business. And there are some differences between those that are, say, food and drink, vineyards, or family attractions, which you have out in the district as well, or high-end sort of five-star type hotels. So there are differences, but those challenges of transport, movement, access are the ones that come up probably much more consistently once you get outside the city. That, I would say, that probably is the one that bubbles up to the top, not just for the visitors, but also for the purposes of staff travel and those sorts of things as well. But common with many of your local communities as residents, those are similar challenges that cross over both visitors and and local communities. And I suppose, in that sense, just to mention that therefore the recommendations that we're coming forward with, are things that benefit, one hopes, not just the visitor, but the local communities as well. And to some extent, the visitor economy is what then underpins the viability of some of those services that you might be interested in.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd kind of like to unpack a little bit the spend aspect that Councillor Batho touched on. There's been a bit of a slightly different information coming out of the Winchester bit versus the sort of footfall figures that we see from the administration, and I wanted to try and unpack that a bit more myself, because we couldn't understand why they were different. And it would seem that the Winchester bid figures are more subjective based, so they're interviews with shop owners, cafe owners, the restaurants, that sort of thing, and they're asking them what their experience of footfall is, as opposed to just the data that you can get from mobile signals and all that sort of thing. So that sort of started to unpack for me something more going on. And when I read about your comments about 2.7% of visitors are spending 19% of the spend, it made me start to wonder, okay, so why is that very low for a start, 2.7% comparatively speaking? Why are they not staying very long? Why are they pretty much mostly just day visitors? And of those day visitors, they're clearly not spending as much as people that stay overnight. Now, obviously, what goes into that overnight stay is the cost of the hotel. They'll have dinner, they'll be in a restaurant, all that. So it starts to pile on quite quickly, and I can imagine that makes up quite a bit of that 19%. But how do we sort of encourage more of that? How do we make it more possible for people to spend their cash? And then your third point on that slide then made me think, well, 80% of the accommodation is booked up. Does that mean that therefore accommodation gets very expensive in Winchester because they know they can fill the beds, as it were? And so does that start to give us pointers as to things that we as a council can do to bring about the right level of change to increase the spending? And I wondered if you, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but you can see why it was coming at different angles there, and it was starting to all say the same thing, that there's some real action that maybe we need to take in getting more accommodation that's affordable for families and that sort of thing. And I wondered what your take was on it. Thank you. Sorry, Chair, that was a terrible ramble.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. And you highlight some really sort of important points there in terms of where the strategy is going in terms of emerging priorities. And yes, Winchester District is a very well established and very well recognised day visitor destination, and you can see from the stats that we have some extremely high figures there. But we also know, and this is common across the whole of the visitor economy across the whole country, that spend usually from overnight visitors has far stronger economic impact than day visitors. There's a number of things that are emerging from this piece of development work that we as a council potentially, but most importantly with our stakeholders, will be considering to start to react to some of that information. And these will be potentially incremental changes. This won't be a wholesale change overnight, but there are initiatives that we can consider that are around refreshing the narrative in terms of what Winchester District is understood by our consumers and potential visitors to be. So in terms of our marketing activity, not just ours as a council through Visit Winchester, but also common narrative shared amongst our stakeholders, and working closely together through that collaborative marketing piece will start to hopefully further raise brand awareness and therefore raise what a visitor can be doing in our destinations, whether it's in the city, in our market towns, in our rural areas, across a period of time that would then be influencing spend. So that's a sort of a key sort of starting point. There's also another sort of section we talk in the strategy in terms of the arrival and making sure the information is readily available for potential visitors, again to incentivise and inform them of where their money can be spent. And then there's a third initiative around potentially developing itineraries, so trying to make it as easy and as transparent for potential visitors to understand what is available within our destination. So putting together itineraries on behalf of visitors so they can see what they can do, and that will also then influence potentially the lengthening of the stay, either through the day visitor time period, but also potentially converting some of those day visitors to overnight visitors. But then also we need to consider what's available within our destination in terms of actually what is then attractive to ensure that a potential visitor would consider an overnight stay. So you highlight accommodation, and yes, the occupancy rates, particularly in the city, but across the district as a whole are very strong, 80% and above in the key periods throughout the year, and also the average room rates are very strong. So that in one hand can bring about some complacency amongst the accommodation market in terms of investment in their offer, etc. But also it indicates that there's a potential to grow that opportunity and to bring more accommodation provision into the destination as a whole. We need to be very careful about that and what type of accommodation that might be that is sensitive to our overall offer and sensitive to our place. And it may well be that there could be some niche accommodation opportunities and rural business diversification opportunities in our sort of rural sort of hinterland in terms of additional accommodation provision in our market towns or indeed in the city, potential around boutique accommodation. But we need to manage that development and that growth quite carefully. But most definitely that is one of the points that Blue Cell highlighted, as there is an opportunity to grow there, and we collectively need to do a further piece of work to understand a little bit more about where that opportunity might be. We have the local plan that covers some information about visitor destination accommodation provision. There might be some more work around that we need to do, and also potentially developing that sort of investment piece that starts to attract developers that we may want sort of in our district that are bringing about a sympathetic accommodation provision that's complementary to what we already have. But Adam, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Thank you. I mean, I think you all know this. It's a great destination, but there is absolutely sort of headroom for growth. But that growth is in impact, not necessarily in the number of visitors that you get that might then cause detriment to this as a destination for, you know, for your local communities. Absolutely, it's about joining up the offer because it's a good offer, but how do you get a visitor to experience more of it? Yes, it's about accommodation. I think, you know, the data's here, but, you know, just to kind of illustrate it again, with a similar number of visitors, because we work all around, you know, lots of different destinations around the UK, almost exactly the same number of visitors. Milton Keynes, very different place, I know, but has almost double the impact. Same number of visitors, Brighton and Hove, almost 4 times the impact. And it is fundamental. Yeah, it is principally about getting them to stay longer, and you know, some of that supply side, so some of that, yes, is accommodation, some of it's about knitting together the offer and making it work for the visitors that you come, some of it's about reaching potentially new markets for whom this is attractive but they're less aware of it, so it comes back to that sort of, I suppose, that marketing, that positioning point, all of which is to play for. So, you know, in a sense I see this being a, you know, a great moment for the destination, because there absolutely is that sort of that headroom, that opportunity for growth, which I think if you were in some of those other places, it would be harder to achieve. So, yeah.
Councillor Murphy. Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
I just wanted to add, because you mentioned the bid and the disparity between the two, they are two very different things. One is the business barometer, which is all about business insight, and interviews are taken over the course of a quarter to see how businesses are feeling, and it's much more of a sort of touchy-feeling report that comes out quarterly. And of course the footfall figures are the ones that are produced by the mobile phone signal, so that you know that they are two very different sort of aspects of gathering that sort of information. I mean, certainly since I've been on the council, which is probably too many years now, but we have seen one of the problems we've always acknowledged is that we would like to see more overnight visitors and possibly have 1 or 2 more attractions that will really anchor those visitors to come here. And in the past, hotel accommodation was one of the real failings. Again, in quite recent years, we've seen the Premier Inn up in Winnall being built, and also the whatever it's called, Travelodge, just down the road. So, you know, new provision has come on stream, but obviously it clearly isn't quite enough. And as Mr. Costello says, I think there is room for improvement, not necessarily just in the town centre, but actually in rural locations too, for a different kind of overnight accommodation. You know, you see, I know my son goes on glamping weekends and things like that in Wales, and I'm not sure we have anything quite like that around here, but oh, good. Well, I'm very pleased to hear it, but you know, obviously we need to sort of grow that side of things too, and so I think there is scope for growth, providing it's managed accordingly, and as Mr. Bates said, it doesn't actually destroy the very nature of the area that people come to see. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Just wonder if you could talk a little bit, unpack, I think was Councillor Wilson's word, on the tensions between potentially the different objectives that you've got here. And I'm thinking in particular what jumped out at me is the sort of, there's the heritage side, and then you talked about the attracting younger visitors. And I suppose there's aspects of, and another aspect about how much you want to sort of lean into it, how far you want to go. Because certainly visiting other cities, there are some cities who've very clearly gone for a sharp identity. You walk into it and say, this is a very deliberate strategy. Whereas others, it's a lot less clear what they're aiming for. And certainly I know you can stand on the high street in Winchester, and if you had just landed there, you'd probably not know there was a major cathedral 200 meters away. So how do you see it going? And I suppose if you just say at the end of this delivery of this 5-year strategy, should I be able to be in Winchester and see the effect, or are we really leaning towards incremental change?
I mean, this is part of a journey. You know, we're a historical, heritage-driven destination with a lot of history over an awfully long time. So this 5-year strategy will very much be, we perceive, creating the pathway, the roadmap to evaluate the scope and scale of what needs to be done and how it could be done. But it is part of a journey. So I could well see that there will be sort of this is more of a revolution rather than an evolution, I would say. So there's going to be incremental growth. When you sort of use your analogy of, when you sort of arrive in Winchester, you don't necessarily know there's a cathedral, just around the corner. And I think that is one of the challenges of the city as a destination. And again, in the findings that we have here and that will be potentially playing through in the emerging strategies all around that wayfinding piece, that orienteering piece, that welcome to Winchester piece. So visitors do get a better feel when they arrive as what is available. But of course, you need to go back much earlier than that, and that's where we sort of talk about in terms of refreshing the narrative of what Winchester as a district, as a destination, becomes known for. So yes, we don't want to go away from our heritage roots and our heritage story. That is really strong, but we're talking here about Heritage Plus. So how can we, revitalise, reskin that heritage story that is more attractive to a wider, different set of markets? And you see in the paper that we talk about some emerging markets as well, some emerging customer groups that we might go for that are a little bit sort of more broader than what we already have. So those are the sort of things that we'd be looking to sort of to be implementing with our industry, with our stakeholders through various different initiatives, through campaigns, etc., through our social media activity over the coming years to start to make that shift change. But I understand what you're saying, that you come to some destinations and it is very clear where you are and what you have, and I think I would want to make it clear that we wouldn't want to stray away from some of our core values, which are around our heritage and our history offer. But there are some different things that we can put around that makes the destination more broadly sort of interesting, sort of around sort of food and drink, etc., our independent shopping offer, etc., and joining all that up, which makes it much more of an overall sort of sell, which then influences the conversion from day visitor to overnight stay, etc. So those are the sort of things that we would be looking to potentially tackle in those emerging priorities. But again, Adam, I think you'd like to add?
Really very quickly, because I agree with all of that. I think we need to be careful about how we use the word young or younger. I think it's the point that we're talking younger than maybe the established or what we consider to be the core markets, rather than we're not Brighton or we're not Blackpool, and I think we understand that. But having said that, within that, I mean, really interesting piece of research just released, I think, in the last couple of days, National Trust. Their largest growth last year was amongst a cohort that I'm doing this from memory, but I think they were 30 to 35 or 30 to 34. So, there are younger audiences for whom heritage is absolutely at the core of what motivates them. And I think it's about being really smart about, yes, who you're targeting kind of within those bigger cohorts, and understanding that your offer does resonate with them. But they're probably looking for slight tweaks to it, and that's where the plus comes in. So, the vineyards, the food and drink, the opportunity to experience kind of, I suppose, nature alongside the heritage offer, which you have aplenty both here within the city and more broadly out into the district. So, yeah, I mean, absolutely, heritage. I suppose that's a bit of DNA. I think it's about how you wrap around that bit of DNA.
Mm-hmm. And I think just as I was following up, So that makes sense to me. Like it's so much of it is sitting there, and there's a bit of it's changing the narrative and signposting. But I sort of, because I've got you here as the chair of the Streets and Spaces for the Winchester Town Forum, so it's very much a subset. I mean, one of the challenges is literally signposting. And I suppose, is there anything that's come from what you have seen or what the feedback as to how strong we should go with that signposting, or how subtle physically in terms of how we move people around? Because again, some cities will be very, they'll have red and blue footprints going off in different directions, and others will be much more careful with it. Any steer you can give us? Well, there's quite a few of the members of that group here that would fit with the sort of narrative you're talking about.
I think with wayfinding and sort of orientation, etc., I think it is extremely important that is achieved, that is complementary and sympathetic to the destination that you're in. So, as an officer, my recommendation would be that we perhaps wouldn't deploy maybe a Brighton and Hove approach, for example, but we would perhaps be deploying an approach that was more sort of appropriate to a heritage destination. It's not all within our remit to sort of deal with all of that, but certainly without a doubt, through the research that Blue Cell undertook for us, there was a clear need to consider the arrival experience of visitors into our destination, into our city, and into our market towns, into our whole destination, but also then the orienteering within. And I think that we would need to do some more work about the look and feel of that, and sort of take sort of a strong, a clearer view as the sort of the strategy develops, and there's opportunities for investment to improve those elements of the arrival come about. So we haven't given any great thought at the moment as to what the detail in terms of what the look and feel of that will be, but we highlighted that there is definitely a need there.
Yeah, and I think, as you highlighted, the market towns, it's potentially even more important, because people at least will have a map or think about the shape of Winchester, but not necessarily the market towns. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Oh, yes, thank you. This might be a bit of a multi-part question, and might be something for the cabinet member as well. Firstly, just when you estimate the number of visitors and the money generated for the local economy, is that including the Boomtown Festival, which I think takes place within the Winchester district, even though it's licensed on the South Downs land, and also the recent Foodies Festival at River Park? I'd be interested to know whether these bring in money, or they're cost neutral, or they are subsidised in some way. And do you have any information on things like the Hat Fair and the Christmas market and the fireworks, to a extent, we know bring people into the city centre and spend money in the shops, and whether events such as the Foodies Festival and Boomtown also have that effect or not? Because certainly my impression with Boomtown is that people from going to Boomtown don't spend any time in Winchester at all if they can help it, and it'd be nice if they did. And the final part of this multi-part question is, this year the Hat Fair was down to one day, and which I regard as a great shame, and whether in terms of the tourism it would be, you could make a very strong case that it should take place over several days again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. So in terms of, I've made some notes, hopefully I'll be able to answer those various elements of your questioning there. So in terms of the economic impact, we commissioned Tourism South East, the Regional Tourist Board, to carry out an extensive economic impact study that we do every 2 or 3 years, and those figures are those ones that you see in there, and that is based on what's called a Cambridge model, and that modelling of research will include multipliers that would include all activities within the destination. So it would include key events like Boomtown, etc., and Hat Fair. So all of that is included in there. You mentioned about Hat Fair, Christmas Market, etc., and those, and how does that influence visitor activity in terms of the destination? Again, coming out of the research that we have found, we already have a rich cultural offer and a rich events program, but there is more opportunity to grow and develop that, and that's all about trying to create immediacy of visit. So we have a very strong, as we've said, heritage history offer, but with that, that's always going to be with us every day forever. It's about creating an immediacy of visit for a visitor to come today or tomorrow rather than next year. So creating and developing and continuing to strengthen our events and festivals offer will help create that immediacy of visit. And there's emerging elements of the research that we've done so far that's around sort of developing signature events and different types of level of events that create that that profile for the district. And so then you would argue that potentially, you know, Hat Fair, if it were to go back to, you know, additional days, that could well fit into that priority. Your question about the Foodies Festival, etc., and is that subsidised? I'm not the best person in a position to respond to that specific element of the question. I couldn't tell you offhand whether we do or we don't. I don't think we do. They pay a license in order to you know, take that space, and I think that is it. The other question, element of your question also was about if people are coming to those key events, do they then actually go on to spend time in the wider destination and spend? And interestingly, a few years ago now, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a piece of research that was undertaken that actually indicated, if you took the Winchester Cathedral Christmas Market, that a piece of research was undertaken that actually spoke to users of the high street during the Christmas market, and that research showed that those visitors in the high street had been to or were going to the Christmas market, but their spend in the high street was higher than the average spend outside of the Christmas market. So that would indicate to you, to us, that there is a benefit that it brings a wider economic impact to in this scenario to the city, rather than just those traders that are part of the Christmas market itself.
Councillor Thompson, I think you want to add something.
Well, it was just to actually come back on the various festivals held at North Walls, and certainly, as far as I'm aware, of course, these events are licensed, as Mr. Costello said, and as far as I'm aware, we do. You know, our cost is full cost recovery of any damage or putting right that festival. You know, if there are any anything that goes wrong anyway, they do have to pay the cost of putting it all right, and that is all contained within whatever fee. But I have no idea what the fee is, so I can't comment on that. I think we'd all agree that it would be great to have the Hat Fair back for more days than one. But clearly, as you know, it's run by the theatre, and they've had a substantial loss of funding over the last few years. So we just have to watch this space, really. And I think, yes, just also coming back about the Christmas market, certainly figures that are produced, I think, by the Cathedral, actually, who do quite a lot of research in terms of the spend at their Christmas market and then what they spend in the high street. And it has a huge knock-on effect and really keeps our businesses that are in high street going for the next year. So it is hugely important, even if we might think it's you know, similar each year.
But a brief follow-up on that, which is, given what you said about the Christmas market being beneficial to local businesses, my hope is that the various events at River Park have also benefited local businesses, and that a strong case can be made for more festivals in Winchester, and because we can demonstrate that they are of benefit to the city as a whole and not just to the festival organisers, that'd be really, really useful. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, something that I should have mentioned, I meant to, is that actually on the specific days that festivals are running, we can of course look at the footfall in the town centre on those days. So it is possible to make a sort of comparison on that. I don't know if there's anything else we can do, but we can definitely do that.
Yeah, no, as Councillor Thompson says, we have access to a piece of software called Place Informatics that we work in partnership with the BID. So yes, we can certainly, to some degree, analyse and interpret spikes in footfall in the city in relation to various different events or festivals or events and festivals that are happening. And we do monitor that. Actually, we have a cultural development officer whose role is to sort of support the strategic delivery of our cultural strategy, and part of that work is actually looking at those sort of visitor numbers and the impact of the events and festivals that we have already and what could be developed in the future as well. So that's a separate part, but it's integral to the visitor economy too.
Councillor Sheldon.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question which I'm going to struggle to not ask in a really cheeky way, so I apologise. But two things that jump out of the report, which I think are definitely to be welcomed, is it's encouraging, multi-day visits and opening up the district effectively, more destinations across the district. And it strikes me that one way you could do that is setting visitors the challenge of getting to Hammond and Vineyard on public transport, which off the top of my head would be a multi-day trip. And would also, I think, ironically involve an overnight stay in Cosham, ironically outside of the district. And obviously I make that point in jest a little bit, but I make that to ask the question of how do we marry, together those two clear opportunities that jump out of the report with the very real constraint that we have on public transport across the wider parts of our district. And before I let you answer, I'm obviously asking that knowing full well that public transport is not the remit of this authority, let alone this committee, but it's definitely something we're going to have to take into consideration looking forward.
Thank you, Councillor Chamberlain. And yeah, I mean, it is very clear in the work that we've done with this piece, but even previous to that, I think everyone is very aware and cognizant of the fact of the challenges. It's easy to get to our destination sustainably, but it is challenging to then move within the destination other than in your own vehicle. So part of this work would be to continue to be ambassadors and raise the agenda in terms of the need for that for better rural connectivity. But as you say, that's not part of our remit, but it could be potentially part of our work to help inform and influence through sort of leadership and highlight of demand and need. But then equally, there are other destinations that I know through Blue Cell have looked at ways in which they've tackled this rural connectivity issue, and part of the work that we'll be doing is also around sort of case studies as well. So some of that work will sort of come out as part of that. But Adam, I think you might want to add in terms of some of the areas that you had looked at elsewhere that had this challenge.
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing quite a lot of work with a number of the regional strategic transport bodies at the moment, who are taking an acute interest in trying to understand how they can support the visitor economy and how the visitor economy might well support rural transport as well. And I think, probably the two most relevant sort of things that come to the front of my mind, examples, if you like, are where the providers have recognised that actually, rather than just providing a bus service, the bus service is itself part of the experience. So you go to somewhere like the Peak District and the Peak Explorer connects up the dots with lots of different rural experiences, but actually the bus itself is part of the experience, and it's not the only one. There are a number of other examples like that. So I think the question becomes, well, you know, is there the potential? Do we have enough sort of string of pearls to join up here that would do that? And then there are the provider supplied solutions. And again, you look to somewhere like not too far away, East Sussex. At the moment, there is the cultural and vineyard providers have come together to establish a cultural vineyard shuttle that they are supporting and operating. And it's hard, but you know, I think there are pilots of things that are being tried that are new ways of looking at how businesses themselves might support these solutions. I know it's a slightly different experience, but Raymond Blanc's example, recently they've just closed the Manoir in Oxfordshire, but for many years they have supported the rural bus network into the village where they're located. So I think there are both, from a provider point of view and a business point of view, there are a number of interesting examples to look at that would have resonance here in Winchester.
Councillor Goldsmith.
Yes, I noticed on page 17 there's one of the things found out by the marketing could be stronger, little to reinforce vibrant cultured positioning. And I just wondered whether any use might be made of the Norman Millennium, which is happening in 2027, and which the regional government of Normandy are very, very keen to promote, given our Norman links.
Absolutely, Councillor, and I think, you know, that you know, in here we sort of, you know, we our current narrative, our current branding is around vibrant and cultured. You know, we've got a lot already here that plays to that, but it's about refreshing that narrative and looking at those opportunities that are coming forward. So you know, Rachel and her team did an awful lot of work over the last year about Jane Austen and that particular opportunity, and that has, you know, greatly impacted and benefited the visitor economy of the city and across the district as well, working with partners and stakeholders. And again, it's these opportunities such as what you just described there that we need to be as a destination looking to sort of capitalise on and create a narrative that actually raises interest, raises awareness and potentially drives business. So yeah, that's something that we would certainly support.
Thank you. Just one final question. I think you alluded to it there. Some of this collaborative work actually requires businesses to work together, and sometimes they're competitive, you know, and their sort of commercial interests aren't necessarily served by working with a competitor. How are you going to get them to work together? And in any of the work you've done with those partners, have you had any positive indications of investment that's clearly going to be needed to actually take some of these plans and policy through to actual implementation? Thank you.
So you're absolutely right in some respects. I call this as collaborative cooperation, so competitive cooperation. This happens across all destinations, across all of the country. We've all, through the work of Rachel and her team and the Visit Winchester partnership, has already developed that sort of base of collaborative activity. So it's not as if we're starting from zero here, and the work that we've done with Blue Sail in terms of the workshops, etc., has helped start to galvanise all of that as well. We already have some well-formed partnerships in terms of our attractions partnership, Discover Winchester, etc., that we can build on. So we've already got, and we are seeing, a willing group of stakeholders that want to work with us for the benefit of the whole district and the whole of the visitor economy. And again, that's one of the reasons why we're developing this advisory advisory group. So we make sure that all of our stakeholders, when we get to the end of developing this strategy and when we go into implementation, that they can absolutely feel that their voice is within the strategy, that they can be heard and that it is part and that they have ownership of it. And by doing that, you then start to influence and take them on the journey in terms of when they are developing their own business plans, that are looking at ways in which they can look towards investment going forward, etc. And that will start to come together. And that's when I said earlier, this is a 5-year strategy, but this is a much longer journey that we're on. So that's very much in our sights to grow and build that collaborative activity that we already have. And that was a very strong message also coming out from the research we had from our industry, that they looked as to the council as being one of those conveners to sort of bring about that collaboration and build on what we've already got. So yeah.
Councillor Murphy.
Sorry, I just had a very quick final question. Just to say thank you for sharing the baseline report as well within the what you presented. Are there seem to be some quick wins there as well as the longer term strategy. I just wondered, are there any steps particularly to highlight there? I mean, for example, those websites that already point to us, but for example, do not mention the vineyards because they were probably drafted before they were built.
The work has highlighted a series of quick wins, and so as I was saying, the next steps will be to we'll get a final piece from Blue Cell, our consultants. We will look at that as a council and start further developing that into a formalised strategy. We will take that out to our advisory group and they will have input in that. That will have wider consultation. We will then take that through in terms of final adoption, but part of that will then be developing action plans. So I would imagine we'll have a sort of a 5-year programme of work and potentially an annual action plan that will then start to bring about some of those quick wins, as well as some of the preparatory work for some of those longer term gains as well. So we'll be certainly reflecting a lot of those emerging opportunities that are already coming through from the work we've done already.
Thank you. And just actually reflecting on the question from Councillor Chamberlain regarding transport, we do actually have within the city, and I realise obviously it doesn't support the rural side of the district. We do have the Park and Ride service, which is well used at the peak times, but is an aspect of the city which could be better used in the off peak. So could ask that that's included in some of the development of offers to our visitors to encourage the use of the Park and Ride rather than coming in and actually using the central car parks. So initial conversations I'd had with the bid was around having a saver ticket, where if you were actually parked in the local in the Park and Ride and came in, you could then have a certain percentage off. And that was a conversation I had then with them, which actually meant that there was difficulty of implementing that because they would find difficulty in actually deciding who that how to have that discount applied at the actual businesses themselves. So I think there are things that we can do within the city that encourage not only additional visitor numbers, but also the use of a facility that we have that is actually at the moment underutilised in the periods of time outside of the busy commuter time. So that's, I think, something if I could ask you to include into your research as well. Thank you. So I think we'll conclude there in terms of questions. Members, any debate before we move on to the next paper? Thank you. Councillor Morris.
Yes, I mean, this is a bit. I'll keep this very brief. It's just while I have the word on the tourism thing, and in following in from your suggestion regarding the anniversary of the 1,000 years of the Norman conquest, the birth of William, very, very important, is that Winchester is also the home of the St Swithin's Shrine. And the St Swithin's Day myth or legend is that if it rains on that day, there'll be 40 days of rain. If it's sunny on that day, there'd be 40 days of sunny, sunshine. And some versions of that legend have it is that is region specific to St Swithin's Bridge in Winchester, which is probably the bridge outside and on the right. And what I would dearly love to see is for people to flock to Winchester every St Swithin's Day to see whether it will rain or shine on our bridge, in much the same way that people go to Puxatawney in the United States to see whether the groundhog pops out of the hole and looks left or right. So I'm just bringing that to people's attention as something I would dearly love to see Winchester do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I'd just like to thank the officers, Councillor Thompson, for bringing the paper forward. I think it sets out a good vision for what Winchester could be, and certainly we need to look at ways to complement the sort of historic attraction that we have here, clearly in the city. I think there are challenges. We talked about those this evening in terms of not only sort of getting that diversity into what is a very sort of traditional market, and I know that that is sort of going to be something that the team will be challenged with. There's, I think, in terms of the businesses themselves, the challenge of actually getting them to work together, and I think that is going to be quite critical in terms of getting this to a point where we can actually deliver on it, and get investment that's going to be needed to bring, as you say, a change of some of the demographics of visitors that actually come to Winchester. But I thank you for bringing it and wish you all the luck in terms of the progression of it. So thank you very much. Thank you. So while the business marketing team we'll move on to item 7, which is the housing development strategy. This can be found on pages 29 to 36 in terms of the presentation. There was also for members a draft sort of strategy consultation emailed, I think, earlier on in the month as well. But if I can ask, I think Carol Egan. So yes, unfortunately, we don't have the cabinet member for housing at the moment. So I think Carolyn Egan is going to introduce the paper. So thank you very much, Carolyn.
Thank you, Chair. I think Matthew's kindly going to share the slides, so we'll just give him a moment if that's okay. Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'm Caroline Egan. I'm the service lead for New Homes Delivery at Winchester. I've prepared a set of slides on the updated housing development strategy 2025 to 2032, which we're aiming will be brought to Cabinet for approval and adoption in November this year. The slides provide an overview of the strategy. However, I hope you're able to review the strategy in full, and I'd very much welcome your thoughts and comments, obviously either live tonight or please do email me in the next couple of weeks. Perfect. So the current housing and development strategy covers the period 2021 to 2030. It sits under the umbrella of the council plan and the housing strategy. Since the housing development strategy was written, there's been some significant economic changes, including an increase in interest rates and significant build cost inflation. In the past couple of years, there's also been a marked slowdown in the ability of affordable housing providers to bid for and acquire Section 106 affordable housing. That's recently resulted in the council stepping in to acquire some Section 106 units to both add to our stock and also to prevent housing delivery from stalling in the district. This combination of factors has made it necessary for the housing development strategy to be updated to take account of these market conditions and to set out the proposed acquisition of Section 106 units as a key focus for the New Homes team, alongside building new affordable housing ourselves. It's also been highlighted by our residents that affordable housing should remain a vital part of the council's priorities. Our 2024 resident survey identified the availability of affordable housing as the most urgent issue facing our communities, Residents also ranked the provision of more affordable homes as the top priority for council action over the next 5 years. So this feedback really emphasises the need for us to keep our strategies around affordable housing up to date and relevant. The priority focus of the strategy is the delivery of additional affordable housing throughout the Winchester district. The council itself has a target of adding 1,000 new affordable homes to the council's stock between 2020 and 2032. And we will aim to achieve this through the acquisition of Section 106 units, as well as by building our own new units to drive an increase in the number of additional homes over and above Section 106 supply. It's also really important that we support other affordable housing providers, invest in increasing the supply of homes provided by them. Thank you, Matthew. So the next few slides set out the main objectives of the new strategy. First, where should this new housing be built? So new affordable housing needs to be built in areas of highest need. This is often where most people already live, such as Winchester Town, but can also be suburban areas and market towns. Affordable housing will also be delivered in areas where opportunities exist. For instance, major development areas and Section 106 sites, where there are assets that can be remodelled or redeveloped, and where land is available for development. There will also be a focus on delivering new affordable housing in rural areas, where it's important to meet need close to where it arises. Finally, we need to ensure any new schemes the council embarks on or invests in represent good value for money. This includes making prudent use of capital resources so that any new opportunities are both economic and affordable to the housing revenue account and demonstrate a worthwhile investment of staff time. Thank you. So we then move on to what homes will be built. The main focus of the strategy is the acquisition and development of new council homes. However, as mentioned previously, there's also an aim to help enable affordable housing providers to build their own homes to the benefit of the district. The council's priority will be homes let at social rent, subject to viability and funding, with affordable rent as a fallback. Shared ownership is the council's preferred low-cost home ownership tenure. We'll focus on ensuring a mix of houses and flats are developed, taking account of local needs within each area. And there'll also be a focus on specialist housing for those with care and support needs, as well as those at risk of homelessness. Finally, in line with our council priority of greener faster, there'll be a strong focus on the energy efficiency of units, with an aim to adopt a fabric-first approach to construction, ensure schemes are all electric, and make use of air source heat pumps and PV panels when appropriate. This will lower the carbon footprint of new homes, as well as reduce energy bills for our tenants. Thank you. So this slide looks at the delivery mechanisms for new affordable housing in the district. Many of our new homes will be delivered via Section 106 opportunities within larger development schemes. Some of these might be acquired by the council, as has recently happened at Twyford and Kings Barton. Others will continue to be acquired by affordable housing providers. There will also be a focus on land-led opportunities to ensure the creation of additional new housing supply over and above Section 106. The council's wider asset management strategies and the opportunities for redevelopment and regeneration these create will enable us to make best use of housing stock and land to increase housing supply. As mentioned previously, it's important that rural sites continue to be brought forward to meet village and parish needs. There's a rural section within the updated strategy which sets this out in detail. So my final slide sets out the consultation that's taken place so far on this strategy and the next steps in terms of approval and hopefully adoption. There's been significant consultation throughout the redrafting, including with members, council officers, in particular finance, and external stakeholders such as affordable housing providers, community land trusts, charities, Hampshire County Council, South Downs National Park and Homes England. We've run a public consultation exercise, which was open for 4 weeks. This was sent to members, Tact Board, all of our council tenants and all external stakeholders involved in the drafting of the strategy. 9 responses were received, and these are currently being worked through to ensure that they're addressed. Obviously, following this meeting, we'd really welcome any further comments that anybody has around the table, and we're looking for those in the next couple of weeks, if at all possible. So over those next few weeks, we'll do a final check with our finance officers to ensure the strategy aligns with the Housing Revenue Account business plan. And the final strategy will then be brought to Cabinet in November, all being well, alongside the Housing Revenue Account budget options paper. So hopefully that gives a useful outline of the update to the housing development strategy and the next steps. But I'd welcome any questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Caroline. We will come back to that from members' point of view with questions, but I'd just like to ask Mr. Tate if you'd like to step forward and have 3 minutes to ask some questions or make his position. Just to say that that will then be obviously taken by members as some of the topic that they can then take in terms of questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address this committee. I have read with interest the presentation slides detailing the Council's draft housing development strategy. I accept that this is a very high level and document and a brief presentation indicating the direction of travel. In the strategic focus, it says that the 2024 resident survey highlighted the priority of availability of affordable housing as the most urgent issue facing our communities. This is very much like motherhood and apple pie, something pretty much everyone agrees with, but can't really explain how it's delivered. I note that it is suggested that more affordable housing will be achieved by investing in new council homes to meet the 1,000 homes target and supporting other affordable housing providers invest in the district, increasing the supply of homes provided by them. My question is, what support does the council actually make available to those other housing providers? I thought about it before the meeting. It could be grant funding. Gave it to Bournemouth churches. It could be releasing Section 106 funds to assist with viability, right to buy funds, Section 106 sites, council land, or the left funding. I do have a reasonable understanding of this subject. I've had an association with the Winchester Housing Trust for 25 years. It was established in 1987 to support the council with delivering council housing when the council wasn't able to do so itself. The first homes were built in Wells Street and then Colson Road. At that time, there were 3 councillors on the board, but over the time, the council reduced that to 1, and now there is no councillor on the board, although I accept we have an excellent councillor observer to the board who brings real value to that organisation. I suggested to the Chief Executive of Winchester Housing Trust that they should approach the council to see what support was available. No grant, no land, no left monies, no Section 106 sites, effectively nothing. As has been said, the council is now cornering the Section 106 availability as in Barton Farm. So it's great to have supportive statements in the housing development strategy, but what does it really mean? And I would ask this committee and officers to look really seriously at how you can support registered providers and other affordable housing providers deliver housing, because my worry is all that is happening is we're shifting the delivery of affordable housing in the district from RPs and other affordable housing providers to effectively only to the City Council. Doesn't mean, sadly, an increase in the overall numbers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate. Right, I'll open it up to members. Are there any questions that they'd like to pose to Caroline in terms of the presentation and the detail that we've been provided? Councillor White.
It's about the shared ownership as being the preferred option. I just wonder how we can ensure that they are genuinely affordable. And this is just something really anecdotally from in my ward, but quite often there's huge hikes in the service charges that people have to pay. And obviously there are things in place to retain those houses in a rural area. For example, they can only staircase to 80% ownership. But that has led to problems with resale and people being trapped in those properties and those issues. So I just wondered how that's being considered in your decisions.
Thank you, Councillor White. Yes, I've seen there's been some articles in the press recently about shared ownership. I feel overall that is still our preferred ownership tenure. Obviously not our preferred tenure full stop, but from the ownership options there are. In terms of your question about them being genuinely affordable, so Homes England now allow, or their guidance, it depends if you're being funded by them, but their guidance says you can start from as low as a 10% share of that property. It used to be 25%, so that's been a really positive way for people to enter that market with a much lower mortgage requirement. So that's been, from our point of view, really positive in terms of affordability. I think the service charge element, it can be difficult. I think, as a resident, you'd hope that you would have a voice in terms of, say, a resident association if you're part of a larger development, much as we would as a landlord. But service charges can always be challenging. And I'm trying to, sorry, did you have a third point as well?
About the limits, staircasing to only 80% and it affects mortgageability and also it's sort of resale, and also they have to sell to people in the local area, so the local area connection can make it difficult to resell as well.
Yeah, so those would only be on rural exception sites. Those sort of policies would be written into the section 106. So you're absolutely right that does occasionally come up on those small rural settlements, but generally on most shared ownership housing, you can staircase right out to 100%, so you don't have those issues. And I know that it's just very important that residents are aware of that 80% if they want to go into that market, but we recognise that there are limitations to it. But the positive of it is that it retains the affordable housing within the rural areas where it's really challenging to build in the first place. So that's why those 80% planning limits are put in.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, looking at the housing development strategy draft, one of the things we want to achieve is to protect our residents from extreme climate events, including overheating. But in how we will achieve this, it doesn't actually give any solutions to this, because it says we can embed energy efficiency and ventilation requirements, when I would imagine what you require for overheating is you need to air cooling systems, you need air conditioning. And given that this says we can embed ventilation requirements, could we not also embed air conditioning requirements? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we obviously would be, if we're either acquiring or developing new units, those units would be built in accordance with building regulations. And thankfully, over the last couple of years, the regulations around heating and overheating have significantly improved, which has really helped going through new planning consents. We do have historic issues on a few schemes where there's been overheating. That tends to be targeted, sort of tackled through things like solar shading, making sure that windows open the correct amount, those sorts of relatively easy interventions. We do have ventilation systems which are called MVHRs, or mechanical ventilation heat recovery systems, which are about cooling naturally within the property. I think air conditioning has its pluses and minuses and has its sort of people who like it and people who don't, but from a climate point of view, I think air source heat pumps and MVHR units are considered the way to go in terms of preventing overheating, alongside things like solar shading. But we'd always seek expert advice on that if we were developing our own units, and equally we'd always ensure that buildings were, or houses were built to appropriate building regulations.
Thank you. I'm if that could be added to the how we will achieve this section, that would be really useful, because otherwise other people ask the same question I've asked. And also because I noted the Future Home Standard also doesn't, the government's Future Home Standard also has no requirement for air conditioning, which I think will actually be something in 20 years' time everyone will be going, why the hell didn't you condition that 20 years ago? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just pick up in terms of the registered providers? What aspects of liaison and sort of consultation have you undertaken with the registered providers? Because acknowledging that though the council is looking to achieve 1,000 homes, I think a significant proportion of what is going to be needed is going to come from that area. So what sort of work is being done to sort of encourage and work with those providers? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Either myself or we've employed an external consultant to help us with this updated strategy. So either myself or he have met with many registered providers and also organisations such as Winchester Housing Trust, as referenced by Mr. Tate, also Community Land Trust. So lots of different types of affordable housing providers. I do have a list of who we spoke to, because I did wonder if I'd be asked that question. So we have, for example, spoken to Vivid, to Abri, Sovereign and Asta, who are our really big registered providers in this area. We've also spoken to the slightly smaller rural providers like Hasto, for example, who do lots of our rural schemes. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we've also reached out to charities like St John's. We've spoken to Action Hampshire and other stakeholders who aren't necessarily RPs, but we've really tried to reach that broad overview from the really big providers down to the smaller, more specialist ones. I think it's also worth saying there's an affordable housing provider strategy section within the strategy, and that sets out how we plan to kind of continue to have those conversations over time. I mean, I personally meet with a lot of those organisations anyway as part of my role, so we consulted with them specifically on this document, but those sorts of meetings and dialogue happen a lot anyway.
And sorry, following up if there's no other questions at this point, what do they identify as their needs from us as a council to encourage them to sort of provide what is going to be quite a significant element of our housing strategy? Thank you.
I think, again, has been relatively widely reported, and we know land availability is key, although often they do have some land to work with, which is helpful. Working that land through the planning system can obviously, always be challenging. And again, we have a housing enabling officer in my team who can provide them with, help, access to information, etc. For our district. We want to make it easy for them to come to our district and submit their planning applications here. They have struggled with Section 106 bids recently, over the last couple of years, and it has been quite an important part of my team's role to try and keep that housing delivery market going, because if there are no organisations able or willing to take on Section 106 units from the larger development sites, then that can mean those sites can stall. So we have been able to step into that market, albeit not competing with RPs. It's more about filling a gap which currently exists. So that may not be forever, but that's something that we as a team, as an organisation, think it's important to do from a housing delivery point of view.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So I had a question that straddled this section and the homelessness section, because it struck me that they were very sort of much intertwined. And I have to say, the bit that this is sort of straying into the next section a little bit, but the bit that I thought I didn't quite get in that report was I didn't see the sort of model expectation in terms of requirements and therefore how we fulfill those requirements, and then feeding that back to this section in a way as to our plan for what temporary accommodation, where we need it, that sort of thing. So sort of meeting the need over the next 5 years. And I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that and how that works in terms of finessing that requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. I mean, part of the consultation I was talking about obviously involves lots of the colleagues around this table as well. It maybe other people want to sort of come in on this as well, but from my point of view, the absolute crucial thing is that we're meeting the need of the district. I'm hoping it comes across in the strategy, but perhaps we can, relook at that and make sure it does, and that's a need. We speak really closely with obviously Julie, Yvonne, but particularly Karen in strategic housing as to what is it that our residents need, both in terms of general housing needs and also in terms of supported housing, care needs, and homelessness needs as well. So yes, they very much tie in together. So it's actually very helpful they both come to this committee, but I don't know if there's anything, to not put you on the spot, Karen, but I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Thank you. I think everything that we deliver is driven by our need for our residents in the district of Winchester. So we've worked very closely with Caroline's team about what we feel we need in the delivery of preventing homelessness and providing more safe and sustainable accommodation over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. So when we talk about paper in a minute, one of the things that came out was that women who are experiencing homelessness feel that they maybe want supported accommodation of their own. So we've built, that's just an example, but that's the type of thing that we've now built in with Caroline with the strategy. So I think we're confident to say that going forward, Caroline's team don't go forward with anything unless there is a really clear need. Thank you.
Just come back on that. So practically, what does that materialise for your team? So you need single women accommodation. What do you do next?
Yes, it's a good question. So there's different things we can do, and it will always be about talking to Karen and understanding what she needs, but it's also how quickly she needs it, where she needs it, what type of accommodation it is. She might say to me, I need something in 6 months' time. She might say, I need it tomorrow. But there's different ways that we can go out and deal with that. We could go to the open market and acquire something. It's everything obviously subject to cabinet approval and in line with our strategy and affordable economics, the HRA, etc. But ultimately we could go and acquire something, or if it's a longer term aspiration, say extra care housing, we could look to secure those through Section 106 obligations in terms of the land. For example, there's an opportunity within the outline consent at Kings Barton for us to take some land there, and potentially, if we decide it's the right thing to do, build an extra care scheme there. But that's perhaps got a 2 or 3 year timescale on it rather than a 3-6 month timescale. So it really very much depends on what the need is and how quickly it's needed.
Can I just ask a question then in terms of the rural situation? I know we have struggled many years to provide and continue to provide accommodation in rural areas. Cost and sort of availability of the land has been a significant challenge. How do we see that happening in this sort of next iteration of the strategy? Thank you.
So you'll have seen we do have a rural strategy section within it that sets out that we do as an organisation still want to deliver when we can in rural areas. We are hoping that we'll have a cabinet report coming in October, for example, for a small rural scheme. But we also recognise that rural can be really challenging. So actually, we also want to spend our time working with organisations such as Action Hampshire, who cover obviously the whole of Hampshire, as their name suggests. But we meet with them monthly, for example, and we talk about land-led opportunities that are coming forward in rural areas in the Winchester district. They may not necessarily be for us to ultimately own. They might be one that an RP is bringing, affordable housing provider is bringing forward. But it's that facilitating, it's sort of making their lives easier, making it more attractive to come here. We also work with those specialist affordable housing providers who work on rural schemes. So, for example, a member of my team has worked really closely with Hasto on a scheme in the southern part of the district, which is about to reach practical completion. Again, not part of our housing stock, but he's worked closely with Hasto, with Action Hampshire, with the parish council to almost like a working group to drive that rural housing forward, because it takes such a long time and it takes so much work. So we recognise as an organisation that although we would like to own more ourselves, it's also about facilitating it for other housing providers to own in those areas.
Thank you. One last one then from me. You got my homework to do for next meeting. Again, alluding to the homelessness strategy that we're going to be coming on to, one of the things that's identified in there is a significant need for single accommodation, not just, I think, for the homelessness sort of background, but also I think in terms of, sort of our, at the other end of the extreme, elderly market as well. How are we going to provide, or what is it we can do to help provide that type of accommodation for that range of ages that we have, that's going to need quite specifically single or smaller accommodations rather than family accommodation? Thank you.
And it might be helpful for Karen to come in on this one as well.
Sorry, I realised with the juxtaposition of the papers, it was going to be quite difficult, and I think Councillor Bolton found the same. There's obviously a sort of a driver from one into the strategy for the other, so I think it's appropriate, rather than letting not having a conversation now. But obviously, I don't want to cut, sort of Karen's thunder in terms of take a proportion of her presentation as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely fine. And again, if we know that is what Karen needs through her homelessness strategy, it's incredibly helpful that we can tie that into my strategy, and ultimately it all feeds up to the housing strategy, which is that overarching strategy across all of housing, which we both form part of. So I think having those really joined up conversations is what it's all about for us as officers, to make sure that those needs are met. So, from a single person's accommodation point of view, it's worthwhile for us to look at our existing stock and see what we have, see whether it's fit for purpose, see whether, a certain piece of accommodation used in one way could actually be used in another. So we don't just talk about new builds, we also talk a lot about, redevelopment of assets to make sure that we're making the best use of the assets we already have. But I don't know if that helps. And Karen, if you wanted to add anything to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Yes, I mean, 2/3 of our housing register who have a housing need are single people or couples requiring one-bedroom accommodation. So just over 1,000 of our households on the housing register require that type of accommodation. But it's also about looking at our offer, because what people want now is very significantly different to what people wanted 10 years ago. So we need to look at our older person's offer and look at that model. But also I think we need to do some further work on under occupation, and what can we do to encourage people to move, to release family accommodation. When we apply for funding, can we bid for alternative types of accommodation and look at moving people? So I think sort of we'd look at anything that's on the table, really, if we're honest, and then look at our need and our demographics, and work very closely with all the housing colleagues and wider colleagues within the council on how we can try and achieve that. But we have seen a significant increase in housing need over the last 4 years, about 400 households. So Caroline's team will build them, and as quick as Caroline's team build them, more and more people are needing affordable housing. Okay.
Sorry, but I'd ask the question, is that sort of then also a conversation with the registered providers? It's not just sort of ourselves that are able to provide that. It's having that conversation with the wider community of providing housing providers. And also just say, I attended the Mayor's Bowls last week, and one of the conversations I was having with the participants that I was sort of bowling against was around downsizing. and they were commenting that actually what they were looking for, or what their age group was looking for, were bungalows. We were talking about Oliver's Battery. We were talking about the fact that Oliver's Battery has changed in aspects because people have then developed them into much larger multi-story buildings, and therefore now aren't what they, sort of that generation are looking for. So have we talked to, and I will come to Councillor, have we talked to sort of those people who are potential downsizers to understand what their needs are to facilitate that process? Because as I know from my mother, she's living in a 4-bedroom house. She doesn't want to move into sort of social accommodation, but there are opportunities around the district for us to release family accommodation by providing what those people who are currently in that accommodation need to actually make them to move out. So is that part of your analysis and part of your conversation? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, it is. Thank you. Just being reminded, kind of, my colleague, we will be doing an older person strategy as well, so that will be coming forward. I think in terms of feeding into affordable housing, so start your question, affordable housing providers, letting them know that we have this big need. Absolutely, when planning submissions come in or pre-apps come in, for example, again, we'll be feeding in to say this is what the need is in that area. These are the sizes of units we would ideally want you to be providing. So those conversations happen alongside Karen's allocations team, colleagues, and also colleagues in my team who make sure that message gets passed on to those providers. When it comes to, say, bungalows, that I recognise the appetite for them. The flip side of that is that they're very land hungry. The viability of them can be really challenging. So I think there is sometimes a place for them, but not necessarily always. And we perhaps need to be realistic about how many affordable housing providers would be willing to deliver them, but it doesn't mean we would never do them. Ultimately, we're about providing choice. We want to provide choice to people, units that they genuinely want to move into to enable them to downsize. So it's important that we take that into account, depending on, say, the demographics of the area that we're looking to build in.
Thank you, Councillor Chelder. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I guess building on that point, one of the things that I was kind of curious about in the report, but I couldn't quite think of how to frame a question around it, is on one of the slides it refers to value for money. And that's an interesting term in the sort of the context of the conversation that we've just had. So if I think about it, and forgive me because I'm doing this from memory, in my ward in Boront, there's a couple of properties there that were explored as potential conversion from 2 properties to, I think it was either 4 or 5 single and double properties, and it was assessed, in the value for money context, but largely, as I perceived, and I'd be curious of your view, kind of the outcome was largely financially driven as to whether it was viable to develop those properties in such a way. Now, in purely an economic sense, you can understand that, but value, I think, as we're probably going to explore, this again breaches into the next agenda item as well, could have a very different meaning in the context of homelessness, particularly if we're talking about the importance of single and double occupancy dwellings. So given that we're kind of asked to provide thoughts on the paper, I guess that's from my perspective an interesting input that value cannot just solely be financially driven in that context.
Yes, absolutely. I think value can mean lots of different things. You're absolutely right. I think my role is to deliver as best I can against areas of need, at the same time ensuring that it's affordable and economic to the HRA, because ultimately that has to be a line. And I am aware of the scheme that you're referring to, and I think the issue there was the significant cost of creating it when you haven't, ultimately you're taking 2 units and creating 5, so you have a net gain of 3, and overall the cost of doing that unfortunately wasn't viable overall. But I fully recognise the fact that value isn't just about money.
And again, you'll be able to correct me, I think, if I recall correctly, there's also a question in that particular case on the sort of the evidence base of the very local need, which again completely comes into play as well. But it's just an observation.
Any further questions? Any debate? Councillor White.
I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about Action Hampshire. It's only recently I've become aware of the Rural Housing Enabling Service, and I just think that is something that us as ward councillors could definitely promote with our parish councils. I wasn't aware of it, so I think maybe to raise that awareness of that scheme, because it is really good for the rural areas.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, thank you. Although this is a development strategy for 2025 to 2032, in terms of those houses are going to be there for as long as we hope, 50 years, 100 years, who knows? So actually it's a strategy for the long-term future, which is why I'm so pleased that all the green and faster things are being implemented. The the solar panels, heat pumps, what we discussed about air conditioning and electric vehicle charging. And with that in mind, it's why when I walk around a certain housing development in North Winchester and I see brand new houses going up without solar panels or heat pumps, and where the garages have no electric vehicle charging, how frustrating and disheartening I feel to see that happening. And I think that is a shame now, and I think in 20 or 30 years' time, people will regard that as a huge missed opportunity on behalf of the people developing that site. Thank you.
Yeah, really just a comment on the old person strategy that you talked about there, and really just to say it is a huge feature of the population across the district, and we know we've got an ageing population, and so I'm delighted to hear you're working on it. I'm very keen. Obviously, I'm supposed to be asking questions, but it's in terms of timing, it would be very helpful for that to fit into the general considerations that we're looking at here. And it is astonishing how often it is the topic of conversation talking to people across the district.
I'd just like to thank Caroline and obviously Gillian, the team, for bringing the draft strategy to this meeting. I think clearly a lot of the work has been done in terms of defining what is the need within our district. I think I'd just like to ensure that we are working with as many other partners and providers to enable us to actually achieve that as we can, and acting with them proactively to actually make sure that they are able to, and if they have the capacity, able to sort of bring that to the delivery of this strategy. So ensuring that it's sort of wider than the council, just in terms of our own provision and our own ability, making sure that we actually sort of enhance and to harness what could be sort of that potential from other providers. So, but thank you very much for bringing the paper. Thank you for the time this evening. Okay, so we'd like to move on to item 8, which is preventing homelessness and rough sleeping. This can be found on page 37 to 232 in the pack, and I'd like to ask Karen Thorburn and Charlotte Quinn to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I'm pleased to present to you the draft Preventing Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy of 2025 to 2030. This strategy has been developed to set out how the council, while working with its partners, will respond to the risk of homelessness and the reality of rough sleeping over the next 5 years. Over the past few years, Winchester has seen the same pressures that many districts are experiencing, from rising housing costs, a shortage of affordable homes, closure of supported housing schemes, cost of living crisis, and increasing demand for support. But despite these ongoing pressures, the council has successfully remained in the top 25% nationally for homeless prevention activities. Additionally, the use of bed and breakfast accommodation has been kept to a minimum, with the average stay being 5 nights for singles and couples and for 13 nights for families.
Considering the wider national picture, this is a tremendous achievement and a testament to the dedication and hard work of everybody involved. But most importantly, it reflects a significantly improved outcome for our residents, which remains at the heart of everything we do, as we know that behind every statistic, there are individuals and families whose circumstances have led them into very, sometimes vulnerable situations. The Council's responsibility is to ensure that our residents receive the right support at the right time to prevent them from losing their homes, and where homelessness does occur, to provide pathways back into stable and safe accommodation. The draft strategy presented in this paper builds on the Council's previous work and sets out the Council's approach for the next 5 years. The strategy is structured around 4 key priorities: making homelessness everyone's priority through a partnership-wide approach, prevent and respond to homelessness through early intervention and personalised solutions, meet the complex and unique needs of our customers by preventing rough sleeping and repeat homelessness, and develop sustainable, supported and settled housing solutions. The draft strategy has been developed through engagement with stakeholders and service users across the district, and it reflects a shared commitment to reducing homelessness and ensuring rough sleeping is rare, brief and non-recurrent. The paper presents the strategy in more detail, as can be found in Appendix 1. Appendix 4 provides the evidence that underpins the strategy, and Appendix 2 outlines the action plan that explains how the Council intends to monitor and deliver on its commitments. So we would value your input tonight in shaping and strengthening this work, and we welcome your questions and feedback regarding this draft strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. If I can ask Mr. Tate, if you'd like to come forward again. Again, 3 minutes, Mr. Tate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address this committee. I have read through the draft strategy, but don't know really where to start. I've picked out the Council's vision, working together to ensure that everyone at risk of homelessness has early and effective access to the right support, and where homelessness cannot be prevented, ensuring a safe, suitable and sustainable home is secured as quickly as possible. Personalised solutions, people not making themselves intentionally homeless. And I've noted the comments of Mrs. Thorburn. Rough sleeping is rare and brief. I felt I wanted to speak tonight. I don't want to be overly critical of the service, but for reasons I can't fully explain, I'm often approached by people who are either homeless or at risk of being made homeless. Whether it's because I have a basic understanding of the subject, I'm not sure, but I've therefore got involved in housing and benefit advocacy work. I'm quite a regular attendee at the Winchester Combined Courts, usually there supporting people who are in the process of being evicted. I've been recently supporting someone, this is over 16 or 17 months, so I accompanied them into the council last April, and they were given housing in a hostel accommodation. I've been in reasonable contact with them, but they contacted me recently and they've now been evicted. He's sleeping in a doorway of a church. I'm not trying to be critical of the council service, but and maybe I just get the sharp end. Maybe I'm just seeing the pure tip of the iceberg and everything else is working. But I say to people, if I can engage with people and try and move them through that path, professionals must also be able to do that. And I find it incredibly disheartening and actually quite upsetting. I spoke to one of the guys earlier today and he said to me, now he's been evicted from Milford House, which I know the accommodation. I can understand why, to some extent, he's almost pleased to go. And he said sleeping in a doorway was almost a preferred option. I've been approached by a property owner who's now got someone living in a tent in the Discovery car park outside the Beacon. And all I'm saying is my experience, and Mrs. Thorburn mentioned that, Every person's case is different. It's very easy for me to be judgmental, and I am, but I have to take that away and try and understand whether it's addiction, whether it's invariably mental health. They have to be treated as an individual, and a lot of hand holding. And I just hope that the policy has that genuine human touch within it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tate, and thank you for all of the work that you do within the city. Members, are there any questions that you'd like to raise with Karen Thorburn? Councillor Murphy.
Just wondering if you talk a bit more about the trends that you're seeing. I'm just looking at page 61 and the 71% increase in the number of households experiencing homeless, but there's a series of those that are developed in that. But in terms of us thinking about this strategy, what work have you done, and how much you understand of how this trend may continue? Because clearly, if it continued at that rate, we've got a different problem than if there has been sort of a step change, but you're seeing levelling off.
Thank you very much, Councillor Murphy. Yes, we did a very large piece of work last year to predict supply and demand for people who will approach the housing option service, and from that we created a temporary accommodation plan and pathways paper which predicted the demand in and the demand out, but also looking at the accommodation we had available and having to take into effect, because Hampshire County Council have withdrawn their funding for the social inclusion contract, what that would look like for the council and the residents of Winchester. And that was a hard piece of work, because homelessness is very hard to predict, because there are so many variables that can affect somebody becoming or presenting as homeless. However, we are keeping track, and we're quite close on predicting that demand. So the three main reasons as why people present as homelessness aren't changing. So they are mainly evictions from the private rented sector, family and friend evictions, and also domestic abuse and possible evictions from social housing tenancies. The very last one concerns me, because your tenure that's very secure. So what we're hoping the strategy will do is do some deep diving into some data to find out why that's happening. So we're really proud of our prevention statistics, but actually we want to get in there even earlier. And who did you tell first? Was it the school? Was it the food bank? Was it your doctor? And we can't go to every doctor in every school and every food bank, but how can we train people? How can we signpost people? So we've actually started that piece of work with survivors of domestic abuse to find out who they first told their story to. You're quite right, demand has increased, and we have the support from corporately to be able to extend our service and our resources. So the housing options staff are supported by support workers such as an outreach worker, a clinical psychologist, somebody who works in the private sector. And we've also had a restructure to make it more robust throughout the management lines to help. We also very, very, very rarely evict, and we're very proud of that. And the team work very closely with not just our landlord services but RPs, and we have pre-eviction protocols, and that is absolutely last resort, and we have funds available to us to try and prevent that. So that is an absolute last resort. We have seen a significant increase in approaches. So we took 562 applications from August last year to August this year. I think the challenge for us is 70% of those now have a support need, and half of that 70% is a mental health need. So the numbers don't reflect the complexity of the cases that our officers and our partners are having to work with. So, but it is something that we keep track of really closely, and we update our quarter predictions at the end of every quarter, and I raise it with my management if we've got concerns going forward. Sorry that I rambled on there.
No, that was really helpful, and I think there's the only additional bit I wondered how much you were factoring it in. We've seen sort of some national coverage recently that those who are retiring are actually now starting to retire on much lower incomes than has been in the more recent history. People had defined benefit pensions. Now we're seeing people coming through very little provision. And I'm just wondering whether you've seen yet an uptick of people running into problems as they retire, or whether that sort of much older that wave hasn't hit yet. Sorry, it's a slightly depressing question, but
that's okay. It's going to happen to us all at some point, isn't it? Yes and no. There's lots of options for older persons, and older persons is defined as 55 plus, and we have amended our allocations policy. So there was a cohort of 55 to 59-year-olds who couldn't bid on older persons accommodation, so they were taking up units of temporary accommodation. So we have now changed that, and been a year now, and that's had a really positive impact. We also encourage downsizing, so we can get people onto the housing register, because it isn't just the rent they might struggle to pay, it's then the council tax is higher, the electric and gas is higher. So what can we do to incentivise people to get onto the housing register and bid? And but I would say it, even though over 55s our approach is homelessness, it's still the cohort between 18 and 55 that make up our majority. That doesn't mean that we don't have complex individuals that are over 55. Thank you.
Councillor Woodsmith.
Yes, I've noticed in the report the impact of the withdrawal of the Hampshire County Council funds has had on the city, and looking beyond that to the local government reorganisation, is that going to throw a great deal more sand into the works?
Might be better answering the first part of that question than I am the second part of the question, Councillor Gordon-Smith. There certainly has been an impact in the withdrawal of the social inclusion funding. As you may be aware, that funded a 29 stage 1 bedroom accommodation at Westview. But I'm actually very proud to sit here, a testament to the team and the partners, on how we prevented homelessness for all but 2 residents of that scheme, and then it was only because those 2 residents didn't want the offer of accommodation that we offered. And going forward from that, that's obviously, we haven't got 29 beds that we can refer into. Our cohort of rough sleeping hasn't increased, and we've still got the same individuals. What we were able to do is work with Hampshire County Council to get them to fund a Housing First worker, so we are bringing in 7 more units for Housing First, and also to continue to fund our complex needs navigator at Trinity, who's having an outstanding success in getting some of our really entrenched rough sleepers off the streets. I'm afraid I don't think I'm in a position to be able to answer the LGR question. Thank you.
Yes, Simon, if you'd like to pick up the second point. Thank you.
I think 2 points I'd like to make. If you look at the submission, the LGR submission, you'll see an example of good practice around homelessness, and that's the example that Karen's just made in terms of dealing with the reduction of supported accommodation because of that county's reduction of funding, and how our team here are able, as Karen said, to house most of those people regardless of the fact that £290,000 was removed. In terms of LGR, I suppose our response would have to be that we hope the other district councils that join us in the new units will be able to adopt our particularly good practice in relation to homeless prevention, and therefore provide a better service to the residents of their areas.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Tremendous amount of work on that Westview issue. That was brilliant. Just to pick up on, you very kindly answered Councillor Murphy's issue about the, when I brought up earlier about the sort of modelling and expectation of future demand and all that sort of thing. And I'm pleased that you do that, and that clearly feeds through into what you need to plan in terms of, purchasing and all sorts of things. So that's brilliant. I'm glad we covered that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was, so my wife's a GP and she can't get mental health services to respond to her. How do you get on with that? And is that a real issue that's underpinning some of the problems with rough sleeping and homelessness? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bolton. That's a really good question, especially when half of our support needs are mental health. We are really fortunate to have seconded into our team a clinical psychologist from the National Health Service, which we currently fund from our homeless prevention grant. And that role is that missing link really between the community mental health team and the frontline housing options officers. They're able to do clinical interventions with our clients. They're able to have those more challenging conversations with our partners in the mental health service that maybe the housing options officers quite rightly aren't skilled to be able to do that, with the aim being to prevent referrals into the community mental health team and to prevent hospital admissions. But then also if somebody's being discharged from hospital and they have a mental health support need, then how can we assist with that? Very early days, the post is only in its first year, so we're not really in a position to report back outcomes because these outcomes are very hard to measure. And I go back to Councillor Chamberlain's point about value, because that worker's value to somebody else is really priceless if it means they're able to succeed and sustain their accommodation and keep well. But it is a challenge. I'm not going to sit here and say it isn't. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, a relatively specific question, which was wary of on a 200-page report, because you might fire straight back at me exactly where this is detailed. What comes across is, you know, clearly what's being advocated here is a holistic approach, partnering approach, and the engagement that's been done to date with those partners is clear throughout the document. I guess my question is, have we done any analysis on, you know, which of those partners locally are going to help us deliver this strategy going forward? So as a very specific example, we are a garrison town. There is, you know, an amazing existing, you know, a lot of work already done by the Royal British Legion helping, you know, people who have previously served in the forces. That's obviously a very specific example, but one would think, you know, a network that is already on our doorstep that we could tap into to help deliver this strategy. So is there any analysis that's been done on sort of stakeholders locally, as say, who could help us take forward this strategy effectively?
Thank you very much, Councillor Chamberlain. Yes, we do actually have a homelessness forum, which Councillor Batho has attended, which we run 2 or 3 times a year, which is all for our partner agencies. So we certainly reach out to everybody. We will certainly make a note to make sure that we reach out to the British Legion and for them to come to the table with their ideas. So this strategy has been very much driven by those homelessness forums, and they were very much fundamental in setting the vision and the priorities. With regards to our partners, some are smaller than others, some more visible than others, but we do fund quite a lot of them. But part of that condition of funding, and something Charlotte oversees, is we want to understand what those outcomes and those outputs are for that funding. And for example, we were at Mayor's House yesterday trying to see how we can progress our work with them, and they do a lot of work. Like for every £1 we might spend, it would save the public purse, for example, £11. That isn't the exact figure that they gave. I was just using that as an example. So we, for example, I'm not going to name partners here because it wouldn't be fair to, but absolutely. And I think one of the things that, because I've been at Winchester for 4 years now, is really proud of is Winchester's partnership working, whether that's the voluntary agency, third party sectors, the churches, and as part of our funding role, we do analyse those outcomes and outputs to ensure that it meets the needs of our residents and it meets the action plan of the strategy. Thank you.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, I have sort of 2 areas of questioning. So if I have 2 questions, I'll use question 1 for my first area. My first area of concern is the spend on bed and breakfast accommodation, which has gone up to £19,000. My question with that is, what measures are in place to ensure that we are getting good value for money from that accommodation? Because I know the experience of other councils in other parts of the country is that these hotels that have them over a barrel and have been known to do price gouging. I'm not saying that's happening here, but what measures are in place to reassure me that isn't happening? And would I be correct in saying that this dramatic increase in cost is partly attributed to the Hampshire County Council's decision to close Westview House?
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. Yes, our bed and breakfast budget has gone up in the last 4 years. So the gross spend from August, 1st of August last year to the 31st of August this year was just shy of £184,000. that sounds a lot, but compared to our neighbouring authorities, where some are spending over £1 million, that's, you know, in relative terms, not a lot, but I appreciate it is for Winchester District Council. Regarding the condition of the bed and breakfast, we don't do the nightly paid accommodation that lots of our neighbouring authorities do. We use reputable accommodation providers. Westview's part of the increase. The other increase is we've had just such an increase in approaches, and as Councillor Murphy identified earlier, so that has to go hand in hand. However, the average stay in those bed and breakfasts for the singles and families is between 5 and 13 nights. So nobody is placed into bed and breakfast without an exit strategy. They're usually already on a pathway to either our supported housing or our accommodation or into the private rented sector. And interestingly, even though the ending of the private sector accommodation is one of our highest reasons for homeless approaches, is our actual highest option in homeless prevention. So we still work really well with our landlords, and over half of our homelessness is prevented back into the private rented sector. But I can assure you, bed and breakfast budget is something I look at every week.
Thank you for that. My second area of questioning is the temporary accommodation. That you give the statistic, which I find quite concerning, that the average length of stay is 312 days. So if that's the average, presumably some are more than that, and many of these families are with children. Can you give me some more information on the reason for that length of time, how it compares to a national figure, and how it compares to where we were standing last year and the year before, so we got an idea of the direction of travel, whether things are getting better in that area or worse? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Morris. Yes, temporary accommodation. Families are in self-contained family accommodation, so they're not having to share. Singles and couples may be in accommodation where they have their own bedroom but have to share facilities. Everybody who we accept a main duty to will either be housed into social housing, whether that's a registered provider or Winchester City Council stock, or into the private sector. They are on the housing register if they want to go into social housing. And last year, as part of our temporary accommodation and pathways plan, we amended our allocations policy, so that they were awarded higher priority into band 2 after 6 months instead of 9 months. They then have an opportunity to bid on accommodation that's suitable for their needs for 3 months, and if they aren't bidding and there is suitable accommodation being advertised, then their case officer will bid on their behalf. It may seem high, 312 days. Our target's 365 days, and that is going down. Unfortunately, I don't have it to hand what it was last year and the year before, but we can get that back and put that in the minutes. Some of the factors that stop people moving on are because they may be a large family and there's a shortage of large accommodation being advertised through the housing register. There may be a child in GCSE year and they have to live near school and be able to get to their school. They could be a victim of domestic violence and they only can go into certain areas. So whilst there's a really good flow of accommodation once you're in band 2, there may be other factors that prevent them from moving on. And it also, to be able to discharge our duty into social housing and private sector, we have to ensure that it's affordable and it meets all their needs. So there's quite a lot of work that goes on in the background to be able to move that family on. But I think compared to our neighbouring authorities, our target is low. I know some of our neighbouring authorities, they're in temporary accommodation for 2 and 3 years, if not longer. Nationally, if we look at the big metropolitan cities, it can be 5, 10, 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'd like to ask a sort of more broad question. Just in terms of implementing this strategy, if it was to be implemented in full, what difference would it make to homelessness and to the residents in our district? And what are the critical things that you need to actually ensure that that implementation is successful? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Batho. That's a really good question. What would it look like? What would it look like in 5 years' time? Well, absolutely that we continue on the road that we're on and we continue to build on the good progress that we've built on. So I would like to see us remaining in that top quartile for prevention of homelessness. we are very person-centred and do very trauma response, but to even get more in that individual's journey, for me, if we can work on the pre-prevention, how do we stop the crisis moves? How can we plan a move? We're not saying that people don't have to move, but how do we plan that move? I think a concern to resources is funding, because there's a new formula out for a homeless prevention grant. So at the moment, this year, we received 781,000 in homeless prevention grant. We've always already been advised next year that's going to go down to at least 588,000. So I suppose one of our challenges to deliver the action plan is we have to consider funding, because if that continues to decrease, we're going to have to look at what our priorities are, what our statutory and our non-statutory duties are, and to make some very difficult decisions. Thank you.
Yes, I actually, sort of as an observer, not only with Winchester Housing Trust, but with youth charities, actually make parallels with some of the way that you're funded with that charity sector, in that you're not necessarily sure about what the income is going to be in the next sort of 12 months. So it is a bit more precarious than other aspects of the council's business. Is there any other way that we as a council could help with that funding and that support?
LGR may have a role to play in that. I don't know really. I'm going to pass to Simon.
Well, there's two things. Firstly, been successful in placing a lot of money in the homelessness reserve. It has been spent on the homeless prevention grants, so that will cushion any blow in terms of reduction of funding going forward. Secondly, the council has actually set up a homelessness reserve of £1 million a year already, because it thought that there could be increased demand around B&B. So the council has already made provision that hopefully will deal with those two issues over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. Debate. Come on. Otherwise, I'll throw you out and make you homeless. Okay. Well,
I'll just say I appreciate your feedback to my questions, that due to Hampshire County Council having to make cuts to their provision, some of that burden is now being passed on to us, and it would be interesting to someone to make a cost benefit analysis of whether that is actually giving value for the taxpayer, and whether there was a better deal when Hampshire was doing it than when we're doing it. So but that's a political question. I shall leave that open.
thank you. I'd just like to thank Karen and the team. As Karen has mentioned, I have attended the homelessness meetings that she has run, and met many of the partners that you're referring to in terms of the work that's obviously presented in the strategy. I'm very supportive of what you've done and the way that that work has then been brought forward as a strategy in the paper. I think we acknowledge that there are challenges external to us as a council from Hampshire in terms of budget constraints and response to that they have, but also in terms of the changing demographic and the changing sort of situation that our residents find themselves in, which then put them into challenging situations and end up then sort of requiring the services that we're talking about. I think the response that we've made in the city and in the district have been fantastic, and as you say, by comparing us to other areas in the sort of locality or wider field, we can see how well that team has actually done in terms of meeting those needs. So again, thank you very much. Would like to make sort of any support that needs to, as I say, continue in terms of the funding. The council, I think, as Simon said, has made provisions for that, but we need to make sure that funding is ensured through to and including local government organisations. So thank you again for the time you've taken to come to present. Thank you. Okay, we're now moving on to item 9. That's the housing compliance policies. And these can be found on pages 233 to 326 of the pack. Jill, will you be?
Thank you,
presenting?
Councillor Batho.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I've definitely got the short straw with the most exciting paper that we're bringing today. So following some really interesting subjects, we're now going to move on to compliance strategies. This report is on its journey to Cabinet Committee Housing in November, and it's to seek approval and adoption of our 6 core housing repair, maintenance and compliance policies. Housing property compliance continues to evolve. It's driven by legislation reform, heightened safety expectations and a renewed focus on tenant safety. There is a business need for us to navigate a complex framework of statutory obligations, regulatory standards and best practice guidance to ensure council homes are safe for our tenants and legally compliant. Now, to ensure our 6 key core compliance policies in respect of fire safety, gas and heating, electrical safety, asbestos, water hygiene and lift safety policies meet legislative and regulatory framework, we commissioned Pennington's Choice, who are a specialist property and surveying consultants, and their subject matter experts helped us to develop in partnership with our own technical teams taking part in workshops, etc. Our 6 core compliance policies that are before you today. And as we have commissioned Pennington's Choice as a recognised authority in property and surveying work, we're not as such seeking consultation today on the context of the policies, but rather providing an opportunity to raise awareness of the policies with committee members here today, and to help and hope that you can help with understanding and implementations of compliance policies when you're working on your casework and in your constituencies. The compliance policies are also required as a business need and part of our housing procurement of one of our biggest contracts, our HRA Council Housing Repair, Maintenance and Compliance contract, which is due for renewal next summer. So it certainly underpins that work as well. They incorporate legal requirements, and some of you will know how important these new laws we have. We have AWAB's law, the damp and mould law. We need to comply with decent home standards, which is looking as if that might be changed, and that change is welcome and taking some time to come. Also looking at the housing health and safety rating system. That's something that is a really important test of safety. We've already been carrying out some stock condition surveys, and we're really relieved to see that those reports that are coming back are not highlighting any high level category 1 type hazards. So that's positive for us. And obviously the Building Safety Act 22, which continues to influence compliance, particularly fire safety of buildings and tenant engagement. Oh, sorry. My screen froze then. The policies define roles and responsibilities. They ensure contractor and staff awareness. They help to ensure, we hope, a culture of respect and accountability. And a big part of the work that we're carrying out with our policy is to embed that in our service delivery. Something that we've had feedback from tenants, and we obviously want to learn from. They're also part of our wider commitment to drive health and safety culture amongst staff and contractors, reduce legal risk and to set clear expectations between landlord and tenants to promote a positive repairs and maintenance culture of responsibility. Tenant engagement to support understanding and implementation of the compliance policy is currently underway through digital surveys, the tenant readers panel and armchair reviewers, a new approach we've got, that consultation closes on the 3rd of October. That tenant feedback will then be collated and reported to the TAC board on the 8th of October and incorporated in the final November committee paper. I think it's important to say that together, policies and procedures, work guidance for staff, provide a roadmap for day-to-day operations and ensure compliance and safety laws and regulations are in place, and more importantly, keeps our tenants safe in their home. So thank you. I appreciate it's the end of the day.
Thank you, Julie. Councillor Chamberlain.
I've got what might be a very lazy question, but just to check my understanding here. Obviously, this is before us, obviously for our information, essentially. I'm assuming the reason we've engaged with Pennington's Choice to advise on these policies is because in each of the areas, or for each of the policies, they are accredited and therefore able to help provide us, help us define the policy in question. And I ask that because, as much as it's interesting to research asbestos and lifts and electrical standards, I'm assuming that's the route we've chosen, the reason we've chosen it.
You know, our drive is to be compliant, and so yes, we're confident that these policies working in partner with Pennington's will stand us in good stead. It's a great opportunity for our officers to learn in-house, but also it is, in fairness, a capacity issue, and we want to have policies in place as soon as possible.
Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, just to say, I love a good compliance policy. I think actually you should be proud of these rather than worried at the end. I think some of these, just about tenants, because you talked a little bit about the engagement that you're already having. But could you just talk a little bit more about how, once these are finalised, what's communicated to tenants? Because obviously they're very long documents. 99% of it is behind the scenes, but actually some of them, the steps that tenants take, are actually very important to meeting the requirements. The one that jumped out to me was where you park your mobility scooter. Yeah, but there are many of those dotted through.
Chair, may I respond? Thank you. So once the policies go through the approval process and our customers have reviewed as well, then what we tend to do is use our communication methods through our newsletter and also the website to help publicise those, and perhaps produce information that's a little bit more palatable and a bit more accessible as well. So that's how we propose to do that, and continue to use our newsletter to share with customers how we're driving service improvement, essentially, and giving assurance for the regulator as well. Thank you.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question was actually not dissimilar to that, but also how are you disseminating this and getting these policies into the heads of the people that need to know it to implement it? And secondly, what's the process for review of this and update? Is it annually? Who does that? Will Pennington do that? Thank you.
Sure. We've had workshops with our technical officers. They've been part of the input, but they are also, now we're at the point where we're looking with Pennington's at staff guidance policies. So they will then obviously be able to become more embedded in the policies and work along with those guidance. So it's very welcomed by staff. People want that reassurance around compliance. They want to be able to look at a policy and think, okay, yeah, we're right in what we're doing. It obviously helps tenants to hold us to account because we've got that compliance policy that SEPL do it that way, so we need to do it that way. So I think it's really positive across the board that we've had Pennington's, I have to say, are extremely helpful and engaged with our staff and want to provide the help that they can. So I think we've got a good partnership with them. We are looking at our own in-house policies and procedures library, and it's now become an important part of regulator inspections that you can back up what you're saying you're doing with policy. So I think there's a lot more buy-in from officers, and we really don't want it to go on the shelf. We want it to be a live document. We intend to review them every 2 years unless there's been any significant change, and then we would review earlier.
Councillor White.
So it says that the policies are required as part of the procurement process for the repairs and maintenance contract. But does that mean these policies are now set in stone? It couldn't be that the contractors try and negotiate them or try and say, oh, we don't like that bit or anything.
Well, not so much set in stone, because as I say, there may be changes that we would need to review it, but it certainly will be a lead for it will certainly set the culture and the expectations that we expect of people that bid for the contract. Yeah.
So I suppose my question would be something aligned to that. I mean, obviously, we've rightly asked questions around whether the tenants and the sort of residents who will be impacted by these have actually been consulted. Have we consulted the technical staff or the contractors who might undertake this work? I only think of the example of, say, an architect that designs a house and the builder that comes along then says, I wouldn't have designed it that way, because to actually build it, you have to do, there's a tension between an art, sort of somebody that designs or has a vision to someone that actually then has to do the work and actually implement it. So have we taken any input from the technical or the contractors who might undertake this work? Obviously, that might then feed into a tendering process, but nonetheless, have we sort of made sure that there is a sense check where there aren't sort of some glaring things that are sort of that are going to be difficult to do actually in the field compared to the actual architectural work?
No, because the policies, as I mentioned, have been brought together by a leading expert in property and surveying. So really, we're setting out the expectations. They're obviously all lawful. All of the policies, I've mentioned a few legislation that we need to be very aware of, but all of the policies have very individual legislation that's set out in it. Other areas that we would expect all of our contracts to abide from. Our drive is to make sure that our contractors are best in class and we're meeting our compliance responsibilities.
No? Any debate on this particular topic? Sorry, Julio. Okay, apart from to obviously give the committee's appreciation for bringing these forward.
To prove I have read it, if someone gets trapped on a lift, the current inventory breakdown, the contractor needs to attend within 4 hours. But if someone is trapped on the lift contractor attends within 60 minutes, which this is 6.4 and 6.5. They seem to be both covering the eventualities of being trapped in a lift with two different time deadlines. Which one is the correct one? Thank you.
I think we'll take that back for a discussion if that's all right. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I was impressed then.
Thank you.
Just don't take the lift out from the meeting. Okay, right. I can see by the level of hilarity that we probably need to conclude the meeting. Right. I think thank you very much, Julie, for bringing that forward, and look forward to it. Sort of progressing through the relevant stages of the council. I think that then brings us to item 10. There were some potential items, Matthew. Simon, do you want to discuss those or not? In the November meeting, HRA policy discussions? Do we leave that?
Yes, Chair, I haven't had the opportunity to discuss it at the council reached. So no.
Okay, we'll leave those. So yes, we'll just move then on to the conclusion, which the next day as it is, yes. just yeah. Okay, so at the moment we've got the local visitor economy partnership in for the 25th of November, and nothing as yet for the February meeting. But I'm sure we will come with some further items before that.
Yes, Chair, if I could just add, Sue Robbins asked me to mention that there is their intention to bring the tourism draft strategy document to the February meeting, not November. You can confirm that in your work programme.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And at just before 9 o'clock, I'd like to close the meeting and thank you all for your contributions. Thanks, Matthew, for thank you, Andrew. Thank you.